Part 14. Everybody in the room was staring up at the twister with amazement. As Darlin's little circles became bigger circles, the twister grew. It wasn't long before all the yellow bricks of the room began to break free, circling the room. Darlin began to chant, "Twister, Twister, bring us to Oz." Before she knew it, Darlin was no longer standing, but flying around in the cyclone. Through the dark haze of the cyclone, Darlin seen the Tin Man flailing about awkwardly. She could also see the great mass of munchkins flailing about, while she's still trying to hold on to the witch. In the midst of it all, through all of the howling wind, Darlin thought she could hear her mother call out. The wind was so loud, though, and everybody was screaming. The dust being blown into her eyes was getting to be too much. Darlin closed her eyes and did not open them until she felt herself land softly in what felt like hay or dry grass. When Darlin opened her eyes, she noticed she was face down in the field of dead grass. She could hear the others around her, but had to take a minute out to rub some dirt out of her eyes. Once her eyesight was fully returned, she scanned over all the munchkins until she found the Wicked Witch. With a sigh of relief that the witch was still contained, Darlin began to look around. She gasped in disbelief as everything looked set up exactly as it was back in the yellow brick room. The cauldron, the old table stacked with test tubes, and all the other furnishings landed just as they were. Turning around, Darlin could see that even the yellow bricks were stacked neatly in a square pile. Suddenly, from off in the distance, she could see the glowing ball, the Good Witch of the North, traveling towards the landing party. Darlin smiled. The light was so bright and beautiful that is compared to the gloomy sky and long since dead vegetation in the field. This was not the Oz we were all used to. It was more like a black and white footage of Kansas before the movie returned to Technicolor. Out of the indigo glowing ball appeared Glinda, standing on top of the huge pile of neatly stacked bricks. She was beautiful. Darlin had never seen Mrs. North quite like this before. Her hair was a glowing red and her gown was a true work of art. Darlin backed up from the mountain of bricks so that she did not have to look straight up to see Glinda. "Welcome to Oz. Welcome home, my little munchkins. Darlin, you have saved Oz and shall all be commended by the wizard," Glinda said. "The wizard?" Darlin thought to herself. Glinda began to swirl her wand, turning the yellow bricks below her into a solid gold tornado below her. The gold twister snapped backwards and forwards as it made its way towards a four-way dirt road. Darlin looked down at the road. She could see what looked to be a massive area which was missing part of the yellow brick road. Suddenly, the tornado, when directly upon the intersection, froze, then dropped like liquid, filling the dirt that covered the incomplete road. Glinda floated down holding one brick in hand. It really glowed in comparison to the gray sky that was in its backdrop. Everyone ran over to the yellow brick road where Glinda stood holding the last yellow brick. She called to Darlin. "You must put the last brick in," Darlin responded. "Truly that honor belongs to a person from Oz." "It can only be you, the bearer of the ruby slippers," Glinda told her. Darlin looked down at her ruby slippers and seen how they glowed even more, bright against the dead grass at her feet. She looked up to Glinda, nodded and stepped onto the yellow brick road. Everyone wanted to see this monumental moment in Oz history. Only a few stayed back with the snarling witch. As Darlin took the yellow brick from Glinda, she heard Thurston begin to sing, "Follow the yellow brick road."
Where's the volume? Right here. You get the point. It was a real party.
The Tin Man and the Munchkins all began to sing along at the historic moment. Darlin, very honored by this, went down on one knee and she placed the yellow brick into the center of the crossroads. As she slid the brick in, the road began to turn bright yellow as it spread out from brick in every direction. Disco backed up and barked as the gold came towards her, but it started moving at such a rapid rate that Disco had turned around and watched with the others as the gold spread out in all four directions. A few seconds later, the dark gray skies seemed to swirl into a purplish blue. The grass on and land surrounding the yellow bricks began to breathe life and color into the land. Within just a few seconds, Darlin could see a dead tree just off the road. The tree straightened out tall and began to bloom with bright green leaves and shiny red apples. From out of its trunk, a face appeared and said in a very raspy voice, "Thank you for waking me from my slumber." Everywhere Darlin looked, new life was shooting up. Giant flowers, robust corn stalks in the field, and soft plush grass. Suddenly, a shrieking sound came off from the witch off in the distance. "I'll get you, my pretty." When Darlin turned, she could see the Wicked Witch of the South had broken free and somehow was holding her mother by the waist. "Mom!" Darlin cried out. Darlin had thought she heard her mother in the tornado, but was not sure till now. Beside the witch, a rack of brooms. The witch snatched one of the brooms leaning on the rack. With a cackle, she laughed wickedly and mounted the broom and shot off into the air, taking Darlin's mother and leaving nothing more than a black trail of smoke behind her.
Chemtrail.
Darlin turned to Glinda and said, "She's got my mother. What are we going to do?" Glinda replied, "You have to go to the Emerald City in order to locate the witch's lair. You need to look into the talking puddle. Do you have a broomstick?" "There's a whole pile of them right over there," Darlin pointed. "Good, then you will fly. It will save us valuable time. There is no telling what she may do in this desperate time," the good witch replied. Darlin questioned, "In the story, Dorothy doesn't fly on a broomstick. Why do you think I can?" Glinda replied, "Yes, my dear, she didn't fly, but that was because she did not have a broom to fly on. All brooms can fly in Oz." Then Glinda waved her hand and said, "Just follow the yellow brick road." She then faded into her ball of swirling light and flew off at an incredible speed. "I can't do this on my own. I never even flown a broom before," Darlin said as she started to rub the sides of her head again in stressful fashion. "Don't worry, Darlin. I will help you get to the Emerald City," the Tin Man said as he walked over towards her. "Thanks, Tin Man," she said apprehensively. Just then a voice above yelled out, "We'll all help you too." It was Dorothy and the Scarecrow. They were 20 feet above Darlin and the Tin Man, flying on a broomstick with the Scarecrow holding on tightly behind her. Dorothy flew down and landed in the middle of the yellow brick road. The Scarecrow fell backwards and landed on his butt trying to get off the broomstick. "Still clumsy as ever, I see," laughed the Tin Man. "Are you okay, my dear?" Dorothy asked with concern as she quickly dismounted her broomstick. "Oh, you know me, I'll be okay," said the Scarecrow. He then was motionless, staring at a wooden cross in the field just off the yellow brick road. "Oh my, I believe this is where we first met, my love," the Scarecrow said to Dorothy as she helped him to his feet. "Why, yes, it is. How fitting for the occasion. Another new beginning," Dorothy smiled. The Tin Man took Darlin in arm and said to his most trusted and beloved friends, "Dorothy, Scarecrow, I'd like to introduce you to the greatest granddaughter anyone could ever ask for, Darlin." Dorothy's eyes lit up with happiness, and the Scarecrow looked mildly confused. Dorothy turned to the Scarecrow, and while putting her hands on either side of his face, said in a soft voice, "Like I said, when you came back to life, a lot has happened in the past 109 years. The Wicked Witch of the South used the ruby slippers to steal yellow bricks from Oz, leaving no magic here. That's why you turned into nothing more than a bag of hay." A tear came to Dorothy's eyes, and the Scarecrow wiped it away. "Don't cry, my dear." Then he paused. "Where is Victoria?" he continued. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. The witch kidnapped all the Munchkins, went to Kansas, and raised our daughter as her own," Dorothy added. The Scarecrow looked scared and beside himself. "But where is she now? Is this Victoria? She does look just like you, Dorothy," pointing at Darlin. "No, this is your granddaughter, Darlin. Victoria had a baby. I promise it would all make sense," Dorothy said as the two stared at Darlin. "Well, isn't this sweet? A granddaughter." The Scarecrow smiled and gave Darlin a big hug. He then turned to the Tin Man and said, I knew that you would not let us down. Dorothy gave Darlin a great big hug and kiss and told her, I'm very proud of you, Darlin. I love you. You have saved us all. For the first time, Darlin felt truly loved. She had always dreamt of having a family that loved her. Even if it was from a 100-plus-year-old lady and a straw man, it was still family to her. I thought that this magic might be a good time to jump in and bring you up to speed on a few I thought that this might be a good time to jump in and bring you up to speed on a few facts that you might be wondering about. The problem is, where do I start? And what backstory is necessary? I suppose Dorothy has always been a good starting point for a story. In the present time, Dorothy didn't look her true age. She looked about 30 years old at best. Not even old enough to be Darlin's mother, let alone grandmother. You see, in Oz time and age are not measured like in our world. The laws of physics don't all apply here. Ever since Dorothy's first trip to Oz, she realized once back at home that she still had the ruby slippers. It was a couple of weeks before Dorothy worked up the courage, or should I say restlessness, to try her ruby slippers again. When she did, she arrived in Oz once again. She found out after she left Oz that the people of Emerald City had spent over a week trying to rescue the wizard. You see, the wizard, during his great plan to get Dorothy back to Kansas, somehow snagged his hot air balloon on a very tip of the tallest tower in the Emerald City. That is why he is still in Oz. It wasn't till 2 spellbooks were recovered from the Wicked Witch of the West castle and analyzed that they were able to figure out the real story that had taken place before Dorothy came to Oz. The Wicked Witch of the East spellbook was taken by the Wicked Witch of the West the very first day Dorothy came to Oz. When Glenda banished her from the Munchkin land, the witch knew her best bet of getting ruby slippers from Dorothy would be in her spellbook, so she stole it. Many facts were learned from these spellbooks. For example, although it was common knowledge that the wizard had come to Oz in his hot air balloon, what was not known was that the wizard had been brought to Oz accidentally while the Wicked Witch of the East had been perfecting the cyclone riding spell. He had been caught in the eye of one of the East Witch's tornadoes. So naturally, he figures he just drifted to Oz. Putting more pieces of the puzzle together, Dorothy also learned that her wicked neighbor, Mrs. Gulch, in Kansas, was really the Wicked Witch of the East, who had took up residence in our world and was trying to perfect her cyclone spell. It was her grand scheme to steal the yellow bricks from Oz and take over our world with her magic. In her journals and notes, she stated how nice it would be to rule the world that did not have happy munchkins, talking trees, and talking scarecrows. Now, this is the funny part. That day when Mrs. Gulch, Wicked Witch of the East, arrived back at her house, realized that Toto had jumped out of the basket on the back of her bicycle. She became so enraged that she decided to cast a cyclone spell to test it on Dorothy and her little dog, hoping that she had finally perfected it. It was the Wicked Witch of the East on the bicycle in the Twister who turned into a witch in the movie. I had always thought it was the Wicked Witch of the West until the journals were read. The ironic part about it was that she was killed in the process of trying to kill Dorothy when Dorothy actually killed her when she landed in Oz. Over the years, Dorothy had traveled to and from Oz many times. Her relationship with the Scarecrow bloomed into love. They were married by the wizard in one of the biggest royal weddings you could possibly imagine. After they were married, Dorothy used the cyclone spell to bring her new husband with her in Kansas so they could start a family. In our world, with no magic, the Scarecrow was also a very handsome man. He took a job as a math professor at the University of Kansas. The two would go back to Oz and visit all the time. When Dorothy found out she was pregnant, she decided to write about her adventures, as for it probably wasn't a good idea to ride tornadoes while she was pregnant. There was happiness in both lands for many years. The Lion became head of security, for by virtue of his courage. The Tin Man became the ambassador of good will by virtue of his big heart. The two ran Oz along with the wizard, and all was good until the Wicked Witch of the South, the third twin in the set of triplet sisters. broke into the Emerald City archives and stole her sister's spell books back. Their hug was cut short by the Scarecrow asking, "Well, where's my daughter and granddaughter?" While looking to Dorothy. "That's what I was trying to tell you, dear. The witch stole our daughter. She is long since gone, and has now taken Victoria, our granddaughter, Darlin's mother." Dorothy told him as she hugged him tightly. This was a very sad moment for all of them. Even the Munchkins were crying. Everyone had already known this, but somehow, by seeing the Scarecrow find out for the first time that he had lost his daughter, relived the loss again. Darlin felt bad for him, and was mad that she had been cheated out of her life by the Wicked Witch of the South. "There's more," Darlin said reluctantly. "The witch has put a vanity spell on my mother, and she might not be on her side," she added. The Scarecrow looked up and said, "Don't worry, Darlin. We'll get back to your mother and take care of the Wicked Witch." His words of confidence seemed to breathe new life into their hearts. Dorothy said, "Did you bring a broomstick?" Darlin responded, "There's a couple of broomsticks over there in the field. All that stuff is from the witch's yellow brick room," as she pointed to the field where all the witch's things were set up so neatly. As Darlin, Dorothy, the Scarecrow, and Tin Man walked over to the witch's belonging, Dorothy asked Darlin, "How did you manage to land everything so neatly? I've always had such rough landings." Darlin answered, "I thought it must have been the good witch who did that." Dorothy then said, "No, it was you. Only the bearer of the ruby slippers can control the cyclone. You must be very powerful." Darlin, almost embarrassed that she forgot she still had the ruby slippers on, said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You can have your shoes back now." As Darlin reached down to remove them, she felt a hand softly touch her back and heard Dorothy saying, "Those belong to you now. My time with them is over." Darlin stood up and said, "You can have them whenever you want." When they arrived at the rack of brooms, Dorothy asked, "What's this?" as she picked up the Swiffer wet jet. "Oh, that's one of the new inventions my grandma, the witch created back home," Darlin answered, her face turning red from shame. Dorothy replied, "Don't be upset. It's not your fault. You were raised thinking she was your grandma. What does it do?" "It works like a broom and a mop at the same time," Darlin answered.
How do you explain a Swiffer?
"I think you should use this one. It matches your outfit nicely," Dorothy said. "Do you think it will fly?" Darlin asked. "There's only one way to find out," Dorothy suggested. "What do I do?" Darlin asked Dorothy, passed her the Swiffer. "You just put it between your legs and lean back like this," Dorothy said, as she showed Darlin and began to hover a foot or two above the ground. Darlin did exactly as Dorothy, and she too began to hover. With a big smile on her face, she asked, "Is it easy to drive?" Dorothy responded by saying, "It's easier than a horse and a buggy. You simply think of the direction where you want to go," and Dorothy shot up in the air, then added, "Now you try." Darlin thought of going up, and when she opened her eyes, she stopped and realized she was way above Dorothy. She could see Dorothy flying up to her. "Wow, this is amazing," she said as Dorothy flew up in front of her. What's amazing is that Swiffer. I've never seen a broom move like fast before," Dorothy said with a smile. "Just think of following me and I'll show you how easy this is," Dorothy said as she flew off. The two flew off and went down in a corkscrew fashion. When they got down, by the time they got back down to the Tin Man and Scarecrow, Darlin was at Dorothy's side. She was a real natural. The two flew right up over top of them and both waved as they continued off into the distance. "They do look all too alike," the Scarecrow said to the Tin Man as the girls waved. The Tin Man responded, "There's something real special about that girl." After a few more minutes of watching them fly, the Scarecrow said, "She's amazing."